Hey guys, this is Miss Mandy. This is my third or fourth attempt to record this video. Um, so I keep messing up. So I've kind of rearranged my slides again. I hope they flow a little better this time. So I'm going to back up to kind of summarize chapter 31 again so that it flows into our understanding of the rest of the novel. As you recall, Huck blames his wickedness in helping Jim to escape to his poor upbringing. He's never been properly taught that stealing is a sin. The passage is ironic because it is precisely because he has not been schooled in the values of slaveholding society that he's able to see Jim as a person and not as property. Mark Twain, is saying that civilization is corrupting um, Huck's innocence. And you see where in 31 where Huck is trying to pray and he's realizing that you can't pray a lie. He For him to repent of helping Jim to escape would be a lie because in his heart he doesn't think it's wrong. The passage could also read as Twain's rejection, I said this before, of Southern values, but also of his rejection of God in the Bible. If Huck believes that he will go to hell for helping Jim escape, it suggests not only the social order in which Huck lives is corrupt, but that the universe itself is unjust. So, Huck has written this letter to Miss Watson of where she can find Jim in order to return him as a slave or to New Orleans to be sold off as a slave. And Huck hopes to ease his conscience by writing this letter. And if you remember, he stops and he remembers his time on the raft with Jim and how nice and pleasant, and Jim's become a friend to him, a father figure. Jim has shown him moral obligation and that Jim is a human being. And Huck is having to decide between the way he was brought up and his heart. And so Mark Twain, what we're seeing that Mark Twain is doing with Huck is he is trying to show you the upbringing conscience and a moral conscience. So the way Huck was brought up um, and the decision to return Jim to Miss Watson, this alleviates his conscience, or he thinks that will alleviate his conscience by returning him to Miss Watson. He thinks that that part of his upbringing satisfies that part of his conscience because the Southern moral that he was brought up said that owning slaves was not a sin. But during this journey, Mark Twain has shown us that Huck has developed a moral conscience. He has shown that Jim has shaped Huck, that Huck has another conscience. Through this moral conscience, Huck has seen that Jim is a human being. Um, and he's now decided to refuse to enter what society says is moral. He's decided that he has a moral obligation as opposed to his upbringing obligation. And by doing so, Huck, by choosing his moral conscience, which he believes is following his heart, to help Jim escape, he thinks that he is therefore condemned to hell. And he tears up the letter to Miss Watson. Um, this is the turning point of the novel. These 7 words right here is the turning point of this whole novel because by Huck's actions, he has rejected several core values of Southern civilization. He has, as it were, torn up a contract with civilization. He's rejecting what dictates a conscience in favor of the teachings of his heart, the teachings that he's learned downriver with Jim. From this point on, the novel's conclusion is inevitable. Huck succeeds in freeing Jim, or does he fail and he and Jim are punished? The hero of the novel, Huck, has chosen his side, regardless of his outcome. So we have 7 words, huge pivotal point of the book. Now, these 7 words are also what is known as the climax, and I showed you this in the other video. The climax, usually in other stories, is a huge event. It's loud, it may be obnoxious, it's dramatic, it may be chaotic, it involves a lot of people. Um, but here, Mark Twain is showing you a very silent climax of the story. You'll hear me turning pages, I have notes. This is a climax of a man or a child struggling within himself. Okay, this is a very silent, quiet, it's not violent. Huck is alone, he's by himself, but yet this is our climax of the story. So Huck's made this decision. He's come to the conclusion that Jim is a human being and he should help him escape. Why then does Huck consent to the treatment antics of Tom Sawyer? So here you've got your turning point of the book, 31, and then all of a sudden Huck is thrown back into his old ways of treating Jim. He's come into contact with Tom again, and it becomes a very frustrating part of the book. So there are many people, many critics who believe that, gosh, I hope I wasn't covering the mic. There are many critics who believe that the book should have ended at chapter 31 and that nothing else should be read. Now, I'm not saying I agree with these critics, but I'm going to show you some people who said this. Ernest Hemingway. You know Ernest Hemingway wrote The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and A Farewell to Arms. These are all 3. I just picked 3 that I thought you might be familiar with. These are all 3 great movies as well. And The Old Man and the Sea has Spencer Tracy in it. He was the man in Adam's Rib. If you're interested in seeing this one, it's a really good old movie. He's quoted to say, "Stop reading after Jim is stolen from Huck." Well, if you stop reading after that, you don't really have any conclusion. So I disagree with that. There's no resolve to this storyline if you just leave Jim in the hut, in the shack at the Phelps farm. Bernard DeVoto is quoted to say, "There was no abrupt or chilling descent." He wrote Minority Report. I believe this is the same Minority Report that was made into a movie with Tom Cruise. Not sure, but I believe he was. And then you have Leo Marks, who's quoted to say, "The ending makes so many uneasy because it rightly jeopardizes the significance of the entire novel. To take seriously what happens on the Phelps farm is to take lightly what happens on the downstream journey." I disagree with all 3 of them, and it may be because I've done some study on Mark Twain, more than you guys would do. Um, so Mark Twain is such a great writer of satire, of taking a really hard subject matter, creating this adventure around it, and creating a moral dilemma, which he warns us, if you remember in the beginning, that there was no moral um, aspect to this book and that anyone would be shot, remember? But there is. And Mark Twain is so good at getting this across. So this part of the story, um, the Duke and the King are are in town and they're doing their old thing. They're preaching. They're uh, doing their old ways of trying to gain money. Um, but the Duke and the King have become a phenomenon known as Murphy's Law for Huck Finn and Jim. If you think about it, the Murphy's Law that says left to themselves, things tend to go from bad to worse. That is the Duke and the King. Huck lacked the knowledge and the maturity and the know-how to get rid of the Duke and the King early on. He knew that they were con men, but didn't know how to get rid of them. And he tried to get rid of them several times, but unsuccessfully. They always ended up back into their lives. They brought more chaos, trouble, drama, but there wouldn't be a story without them, right? So they just kind of added to the storyline. But we find that here, in this part of the book, um, they have been tarred and feathered. This is the clearest I could get. This only shows one. Oh, there's the other one. He's back here in the back. So they have been tarred and feathered. And this would have been after the Wilkes situation. Um, Huck actually has sympathy towards them. He doesn't want them to go through a lot of pain and misery. Um, so there again, you see a moral heart feelings coming from Huck. Now remember, Huck is a young child. Huck is like between 12 and 14 years old. So that would be like my son Micah's age. So that's a lot of maturity for that age of a boy. Now here we have this is the funny part. Phelps Huck has come to the Phelps farm, and Aunt Sally thinks that he's Tom, and Huck runs into Tom, and Tom says, "Okay, I'll be Sid." And then Aunt Sally, I put this in there. She's gonna be gullible. She plays along with all this. Now Sid, if you haven't read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, you're not gonna know who Sid is. Sid is a cousin of Tom, and the Phelpses thought that Sid was coming originally. No, wait. No, they thought Tom was coming originally. So that's why they mistake Huck for Tom, and Huck plays along. But then when Huck sees the real Tom come in, he's like, "Whoa, wait, we gotta, I'm Tom." So Tom's like, "Okay, fine, I'll be Sid." So a lot of confusion. I hopefully, as you read this, you didn't get too confused as to who was being who. So we have this really neat story. It's very simplistic of how Huck and Tom interact with each other at the very onset of when they run into each other. So Tom thinks that Huck is a ghost. He's like, "No, I'm not." And Huck's like, "Yes, you are." I'm sorry, I got that all mixed up. This is Huck. This is Tom. Let me play that back. I'll play that over so you can follow along because I messed that up. Okay. Huck with the fishing rod. Tom Sawyer. Okay, so they meet on the road. Huck has already developed himself as Tom on the Phelps farm. He comes into contact with Tom. Tom has said, "Okay, I'll be Sid." So when Tom first sees Huck, he thinks he's a ghost. Huck's like, "No, I'm not." He's like, "Yes, you are." I'm like, "No, I'm not." "Okay, you're not." Just very simplistic. Then he says, "Let me tell you what all has happened to me and Jim." He's like, "Okay, cool. I'll help. Let's make this fun." "Really?" So, in essence, you've got this very simplistic conversation going back and forth between the two boys. When Huck tells Tom all the stuff that's happened to him and Jim on the river, he and Jim on the river, and about the Duke and the King and the Wilkes farm, and he's just kind of giving him a sum up, and he's told Tom that Jim has been captured and that Huck has decided to free him. And Tom says, "Cool. I'll do it too. Let's make this fun. Why does Huck question? It's not just okay, yeah, sure, come on. He says really. He actually struggles over why Tom would help Huck. At this point, Huck does not see Tom as an abolitionist. He does not see Tom to have any moral values or moral obligations to Jim. Huck has had real life experiences, and Huck knows that freeing Jim is important, that it's not a game. And let's go on to the next slide. So first let's talk about the plan. They each have their own plan. Huck's plan is to bring the raft over from the island, steal the key from Mr. Phelps and then free. Get off. Ow. Sorry, I'm outside and there's a big huge stink bug on my chair. And I smushed my fingers. Okay. Just bring the raft over from the island, steal the keys from Mr. Phelps, and free Jim and escape downriver. Simple plan, right? Get it done, get out of there. Well, Tom's plan is a little bit more elaborate. He wants to write secret messages. He wants Jim to write on a shirt with his own blood. He wants to tame rats and spiders, which Jim hates. He wants Jim to water plants with his tears. The boys are going to smuggle tools and messages to Jim and eventually dig Jim out. Okay, so they go with Tom's plan. Now, why do you think Huck goes with Tom's plan? Why Huck knows that this is important, that this is not a game. Well, let's look at Huck versus Tom, their personalities, and what makes them who they are. Huck is what is called a limited character. He's plain, he's simple, he's practical. He knows that the stakes are much higher. He knows that if Jim is caught, he could be killed. Jim is a human being and has become a friend to him. And Huck is acting on a moral decision. Tom, on the other hand, is what is called a romantic character. He's elaborate, he's imaginative, and he's literary. He's made this into a game. He is play acting the adventures he has read about in his books. And Jim has become a source of amusement to Tom. So, hang on just a minute. I need to pause this. Okay, I'm back. So, I stopped my recording. Let me get back to present. This is recording on YouTube. A friend of mine has just driven up. We are abiding by the 6 foot rule, 3 foot, 6 foot, whatever. All right, so I talked about Huck's limited character, Tom's romantic character. So, why does Huck let Tom rule how they're going to let Jim escape? Well, you have to think about that he doesn't have the language, the vocabulary, the personality to be the leader of what's happening. Huck is more of a follower, and Tom is your leader. So Huck's thinking, as long as all this ends with Jim escaping, okay, let's have a little fun with it. He thinks that Tom is more educated than he is because Tom's been in school longer than Huck has. But Tom is what you would call book smart, and Huck is what you would call street smart or river smart at this point. Huck has had more life experience than Tom going downriver. He knows the importance of of trying to free Jim, and Tom does not. But Huck has a more passive personality, and Tom has a more aggressive personality. So that's where we're going to end today. I'm going to pick up with chapter 37. I don't know how far I'm going to go, but that's where I'm going to pick up. And just to give you a little bit of info, someone gets shot in the next couple of chapters. So if you have any questions, please email me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Y'all have a good one. And it's still recording.